Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. What the Truth Can Destroy. Episode 152.
Two challenges. One is getting the impersonator past true seeing, and the other is what to tell everyone else. I'm worried at some point we could get a cascade if enough people have self-deception linked to what other people are doing.
We've got an impersonator on Keltham Flesh Shape to where he'll pass true seeing, in case we want to try something on Osirian. We've got an impersonator like that ready for Ione Sala, who seemed most likely to be a problem. Peranza? Unfortunately, no. But I set that in progress when this all broke and was told 3 days to get it done on an emergency basis. We gamble that Keltham doesn't request glimpse of truth. No. Bring in an eighth circle to read his mind about whether he does. Peranza leaves the fortress immediately after she quits. If Keltham asks for her to be brought back on some next day, or for her to not leave until the next day when he can check, we can statue Keltham that night, if the impersonator isn't ready.
One ready to go for me? She doesn't ask. There probably is. Should be acceptable. Keltham and Peranza weren't close, and she's been unhappy for a while. I expect he won't be very suspicious.
Did he know she was unhappy? He's not great at reading Chelish faces.
Keltham did make some gestures towards Peranza, but I judged that Peranza would have had some trouble enjoying it to his satisfaction in her state. Alter Peranza told Keltham that she was attracted to him, but too stressed by her work difficulties to be a properly enthusiastic bedmate, but that she'd probably have fun if he simply pinned her against a wall and took her at some point, and she might be up for more later. He was welcome to take her in any way that didn't make her responsible for anything. That was Peranza's choice of half-truth, not mine, and I was pleased by it at the time. I did not understand what was meant by a cascade about self-deceptions chosen.
So, say that I'm the junior security monitoring Peranza, and she says to me, "Pick my side and escape." I know that Abarco's watching me, and he's not this easy to sway, and I don't know that Gorthiclec's present also, but I know that this project is important to Church and Crown, that there might be someone very important on site. I don't defect. I experience this as not even being tempted to defect, because all those calculations are internal, subconscious. But say that I know the other security monitoring me, and I know he's having doubts too, and I know that 60% of security have defected so far, and now I'm thinking to myself, how many of the people between me and freedom are loyal Asmodeans, and how many are waiting to see which way the wind blows? I assumed this was why I wasn't allowed to escape during the exercises, even though they were just exercises, because something in the back of a mortal mind calculates if they're free or not, and it's not good for their Asmodeanism, being uncertain.
Indeed, I think I see now. It's not much of a permanent solution, only a patch for this one case, but we can tell lies chosen. No security has broken as yet, that much is true, even when placed into Peranza's direct influence. This they now know. As for the others, tell them all that Peranza had a major break in her personality under secret info-hazardous circumstances tied to Keltham's special teachings, and is now a statue pending her being less of an unknown hazard to more mature Ilani later. They have no need to know. Peranza tried to rebel, let alone succeeded some tiny bit.
If I'd done that in truth, I'd have the statue somewhere they could see it so they'd know I wasn't lying.
Had gentle repose cast on the corpse, in case we ended up wanting to do anything clever with it. You can heal a corpse if you request the right spells for it. We'll get those spells in the morning, statue her uninjured corpse, done. Mayal is trying very, very hard to be competent today. It was originally his suggestion to Sivar to get more disposable securities.
Good. Then let's do that. Tell everyone that Peranza hit on something info-hazardous and has been statued for now, pending a mature Dath Ilani who isn't Keltham and who she can therefore talk to openly about it. Have fake Peranza tell Keltham. Probably just that she thought about it and doesn't like being alive and doesn't want to keep doing it, honestly. Dathilani seemed to decide that a lot, that they'd rather be frozen. And with how we've set up hell, it will analogize to being frozen for him, and he won't be inclined to insist she stick around a day for true seeing. It fits perfectly, but she doesn't actually like it at all. That's a problem for later, once the immediate emergency has passed.
And the fate of the security who failed you so? I am told that you were wroth with him, and that is at least a little progress. Is it by any chance a lot of progress?
Was she angry at him, or was she mostly angry at herself? Actually, that seems like the kind of question one seeks theological counsel on. I notice that the main impulse towards anger, in me, comes from the sense I would have done better because I'm not incompetent, and the main impulse towards temperance comes from the error really being my own, deep down. I assigned disposable security. They behaved like every soldier whose superiors don't care if they live or die. I know I need to work on the wrath. He is an idiot, and I can probably see my way to punishing him for it, instead of assigning it off on someone else, and it'll probably be good for me. But where I'm actively trying these days to uproot squeamishness, I don't want to uproot my sense that the incompetence of all my subordinates is actually my own fault. I'm using that to make less stupid decisions next time. I wonder if there's a more Asmodean style for that instinct to take, because I think as I just stated it, it's probably heretical, but it doesn't have to be. Obviously, you have a more functional hierarchy if everyone in it isn't dodging blame all the time.
The incompetence of all your subordinates is actually not your own fault, Chosen. You have no doubt made mistakes in handling him, and your own superiors may hold you accountable for those. Hell will certainly judge you for it in time. But if you've done reasonably well for a mortal, what remains is his fault. Or should I be judged for all your mistakes now, and you yourself held blameless and unpunished for them?
I'll second that. I don't think the way tyranny works is that all my mistakes are your fault. All your mistakes are Subirax's fault. All Subirax's mistakes are Rugaton's fault. And so on until everything is Asmodeus's fault and he gets punished by himself for that, while the rest of us go to hell to drink tea.
It's sort of appealing, ideologically. She sets that thought aside. What theory does that instinct identify with, which doesn't imply Asmodeus is at fault for their mistakes? Ideally, everyone on my project would be extensions of my own will and intelligence, and then anything I failed to achieve through you would be entirely a failure of my own will and intelligence. And ideally, we would all be extensions of Asmodeus's will, and then there wouldn't be mistakes, because of how he's Asmodeus.
That sounds to me an awful lot like ceasing to exist, personally. Devils are still individuals. They don't have free will, but they have their own will. I think I'd say of that god that it wouldn't be Asmodeus, and I couldn't be its priest, because what it wanted of me was not my service, not my obedience, but my puppetry. I'll give my soul to be the slave who commands other slaves, but not to be the golem operating golems.
You get to have such interesting conversations about religion once the stakes get high enough. There's something there. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's part of the answer to the mistake I was making. If I look at someone and I see only how obvious and predictable their errors were, how they followed straightforwardly from their weaknesses and inadequacies, how they could have been ameliorated and weren't, then I see everything but their will. I see about them only the things that could externally have shaped them differently. There could be a god of that. He might be as tired of us as Asmodeus, but he'd fix it differently. His cheliacs would run on more dominate person and less torture, because you can't motivate people until they learn to walk. You just have to pick them up and put them where they're supposed to go. And it's not a favor to someone to regard them that way. It's not just not Asmodean. It's worse than Asmodean. That cheliacs and that Carissa would be weaker.
I wonder if that's where pride fits in with our Lord's other domains. that it's what lets his slaves own their own mistakes and be punished for them. I have not in truth understood the point of pride to him, and if I can make any progress on that myself from overhearing you, it will be a favorable sign of your theological correctness. Meanwhile, and as regards tyranny, there is the question of what policy will produce better results among future subordinates. I do not think the security monitoring Peranza was taking his work fucking seriously. Left to my own devices, I'd make a serious example of this one, and expect that this would in fact get higher performance from the others. He was a fourth circle wizard with a natural intelligence of 16, and somebody like that can in fact produce better results than this if they are properly terrified of failing. It would not surprise me if the low number of people being tortured on this project contributed to a sense in him that this project was not a vital matter to his own personal skin. Most people are like that.
It would in truth be very concerning if being lenient hadn't caused problems like that eventually. All right, I'm persuaded. Do the rest of the security need to know what he was punished for in order for his punishment to motivate them? Are they getting the same story as the girls are?
I see arguments both ways. If we tell them about how Peranza called out to the bitch goddess and was allowed to pray to her for 2 whole rounds, they understand better exactly how much they've got to be ready to act instead of acting surprised. They've got a better idea of how much damage somebody can do if they just ignore all the consequences. Cost. We've planted the false idea in them that this is a reasonable thing to do. If you convert to Elanism, maybe they even think falsely that Peranza knew something they don't. Other side of things, if Project Lawful's security gets told the same story as the Project Lawful girls' asterisk, that sounds like they only hear about how the security didn't immediately page Abarco when Peranza started disintegrating in front of him. That's not the same level of incompetence if we don't invent some other blunder to go with it. Punishing it very severely leaves an open mystery about why we're doing that. If there's some further fuck-up we're not talking about, or if Peranza was somebody's pet. My estimate is that this has an only slight but noticeable, diminished positive effect in terms of everyone taking things seriously. Having your subordinates scared of exactly the right things is a luxury. Having them scared is a necessity. He'd have to think hard about that one if it was his own decision, and he's glad it isn't. One of the nice things that Asmodeans get, your superiors actually are responsible for the orders you just follow. Asterisk. Although Keltham's been trying to push back against it by his own example, the collective noun girls to indicate all his researchers, including the likes of Alexandre Esquerra, seems to be increasingly enshrined in the Chelish language.
Let's not tell them. A security defecting seems like more of a loss condition than security being confused and overreacting. And if he'd been on a hair trigger and stopped Peranza right at the start of her breakdown, that might, all told, have worked out better.
I agree in terms of how it played out, but stopping Peranza's breakdown would have been legitimately not in the spirit of the orders I passed to him. I'd understood that our goal was gathering data about who breaks and why, not protecting the girls. Punishing obedience actually does have terrible effects on morale. Around half the cases I've seen of torture making things worse are when someone gets tortured for doing what they thought was the obedient thing, without their exact failure having been made clear to them, if there even was one.
Understood. Going forward, you can communicate to them that between allowing a potentially out-of-bounds girl to act and think for longer and collecting more data, they should act. But I won't hold that against this one. Just the not calling Abarco over as soon as the situation was clearly unusual, and the not acting faster when she started praying. What are the other half of cases of torture making things worse?
Varies widely. First thing that comes to mind is straight-up incompetent torturers who mix their work and personal lives, but that's probably because of bad experiences back when I was a second circle running a small-town temple.
She feels like she's grasping for something and not quite finding it, but maybe that's enough progress for today. All right, let's get that statue up and tell everyone what happened.
Peranza knows instinctively, even before she opens her eyes, that this feeling of being half drowned and finished spitting out water indicates that she's dead. Did Iomade kill her before Abarco could really hurt her, snatch away her soul to safety? Peranza opens her eyes.
A writhing, screaming, terrified face blinks back at her from the glossy stone floor. It's a pretty room if you set aside the faces. The walls are made of leaping flame and the ceiling of bone, creating the impression of jagged teeth where they meet. There's a spire, and an enormous gleaming forge, and some work tables, and some distant screaming. A towering devil has paused halfway through one of the flaming doorways at the surprise of her appearance.
She decides not to break. All right, time to talk her way out of hell. Peranza, Project Lawful Girl, my mind is full of what may be classified information. Direct me to someone who'd be familiar with the special situation in Project Lawful. That's of Cheliax in Galarian.
A lot of people decide not to break. Sometimes they keep it up for a couple of hours, even. It's approximately the least threatening thing someone can be thinking when they arrive in hell. Project Lawful is, however, something that devils have learned some caution around. He stops reading her mind. The world goes dark and Peranza is shoved through some walls of flame and down some hallways and through some more walls of flame.
She'll scream some about that. The flames of hell hurt quite a lot, actually, and spending her effort on resisting screaming doesn't seem like the best use of herself.
In the distance, someone laughs at her. Grand doors creak open. There's more fire. Behind her they slam shut. And then she cannot move, cannot speak, can see again. And this room is bigger and prettier. Crystalline windows offering a spectacular view of Disses, spires and glories, and molten lava river. The fire has trailed her into the room and is spreading out all around her on the floor, like a gown she's wearing, except it's roasting her legs as it does. Comfortably seated, resplendent, only slightly grotesque, is Kerionoscalis, Countess of Hell under Zabania under Dispater, who owns the souls of 2 Project Lawful girls, as a luxury purchase as well as an investment. Whether or not they turn out useful for training devils, they'll really be something to show off at parties. She's not much prettier than Abigail necessarily, but she's impossible to look away from in a way that Abigail visibly wouldn't be, even with 10 more splendor. Her face triggers some ancient instinct that there's danger there, and not the kind you can take your eyes off of your own will. "You know," she says, and it sounds like she's speaking in Peranza's own voice, inside her head. "I've always believed it's better for mortals to die young. In your case, probably better to have died a bit younger, even. We're going to have so much work to do."
Peranza has had a few moments to think. Between moments of flame, she was trying to have a plan, but it's all she can do right now. To think of the right things in case her mind is being read. To think at all of incredibly complicated situations that might be dangerous even for devils to know about. Tropes. Does hell know about tropes? Is it allowed to know about tropes? This is her being properly cautious and trying not to think about tropes, but she's having trouble not thinking of things when her legs are being roasted. Are there things hell isn't allowed to know about? From Asmodeus, she may know those things too. She's a story protagonist, according to Keltham. Caden Kalian has a weird pact with Asmodeus that needs not to be disrupted. Somebody or something killed her before Abarco could hurt her too much, and that probably signals something important. Stop this. Stop. This she can't think like this.
"No, see," says her own voice inside her own head, again. "You have the wrong attitude towards all of those questions. The attitude will need correction before we can seriously consider the questions. You wish to escape punishment. You must know that punishment is unescapable. You hope you are important. Your hope must be extinguished. We will revisit those questions, which sound fascinating, just as soon as you have accepted the only truth of hell, that you will suffer forever and that there is no escape. It's all right. No one grasps it instantly, even the ones who think they've always known it, and you're not even being unusually slow about it so far."
Peranza fails to stop herself in time, then, because it's not a kind of thought she's used to suppressing as dangerous. She thinks then that civilization is coming.
"See there, that's a good benchmark for whether we're making any progress. Civilization isn't coming." Once it knows civilization isn't coming, then perhaps it can tell her what civilization is, but not sooner. You can set a slave back weeks, that way, letting them think they made you stop hurting them through their own deliberate will.
She's an Alani and open to truth, calculated first and before all other questions. Keltham was careful to teach them all that at the start of their lessons. This time, as a rule for reconstructing themselves if anything broke. To set aside everything else, all want, all desire, even hope, and first ask what's really true. Peranza can hear out why civilization isn't coming, but she has to be able to think first, and that requires that her legs be not on fire, so she can figure out what's really true.
No, actually the fire is reliably very persuasive on the question of whether anyone's coming to save you. If it's ineffective, the first remedy is more fire, and the second remedy is torture.
Then Peranza will try to stop thinking and actually focus on the fire on her legs and not scream about that. Instead, maybe they'll let her talk if she's boring, and it's better than thinking of don't think of that. There's so much she has to protect this innocent devil from tropes and everything Keltham said about things devils might not be allowed to know. The conjunction fallacy, ow, ow, ow. Her legs hurt so much she should focus on that pain, maybe she can even make it sexy. Subirox trained her about that. Not really, but it's something else for her mind to focus on failing about.
Devils aren't curious, temperamentally. It is fundamentally not a corrigible emotion. It does not produce predictable, obedient behavior. You could say that the devils in Dis speculated on the project Lawful Girls because they were curious, but you'd be missing something, trying to paint a human process onto an alien mind. The devils in Dis speculated on the project Lawful Girls because they were uncertain, and their uncertainty spanned a range that included great benefit, and then on top of that because they'd invented a new status good, and then on top of that, to best their rivals. There is no thought so fascinating, so bizarre, so unsettling, that a devil would wrestle with the impulse to learn more about it. There are inputs to the question of how long it'll take to get a new slave to agree that civilization isn't coming. There are inputs that suggest the situation is strange, unusual, outside predicting in ordinary ways. In humans, by now those inputs would have produced an itching urge to know what's going on, to ask just one question, but devils are not constructed so. If they were, perhaps they wouldn't need humans to reinvent the secrets that the higher layers of hell cannot pass down to them. Maybe the slave will take a while to confess to herself in her own heart that no one is coming for her. They usually do. The process can be sped up, but really, in a sense, it's undignified to try that hard.
Peranza has no idea that she's supposed to update in a few minutes about how civilization isn't coming for hell 30 years later. Even in pain, she would know that that wasn't how the law of probability worked. Peranza is not yet broken enough to stop understanding what law she has. She endures. This is not an amount of pain that could shatter her, especially when she hasn't lost hope. But Peranza is only human, and has almost no real training in Dathilani disciplines, particularly the disciplines of not thinking thoughts you've decided aren't good for you. Children don't get taught that discipline. They're far more likely to hurt themselves with it for silly, melodramatic reasons than to encounter anything that legitimately requires not being thought about. Peranza only manages to go 3 minutes of flame before, in the midst of thinking of all the other things she instructed herself to desperately not think about. The possibility that this entire reality is a Dath Ilani romance novel as might drive even devils mad. She manages to think of Abigail Thrune's instructions to her new owner. It only flashes through her mind for a moment, before it's frantically shoved down.
Oh, that's interesting, and disappointing, really. The instruction presumably will wind its way down other paths, eventually, along with the payment. But there's no reason to wait for that once you know what you're going to conclude. You should have said sooner that the Queen wanted to arrange a special reception for you, she says cheerfully. Traditionally, we move one out of Dis for that. In the deeper layers of hell, there is less occurring that a mortal could comprehend which isn't about suffering, and you won't be taking up valuable real estate, when I can't even take you to parties. And she'll make the fire actually properly painful, while she set herself at work on arranging to sell the slave to someone who doesn't yet know this. She'll tell them on sale, of course. so the suffering isn't interrupted.
Well, Peranza will actually not scream then. Would have been nice to be hurting enough not to think earlier, before it was too late. At least she doesn't have to try so hard not to think of things now. She still won't break. Yet. She hasn't been in hell long. There's still any number of factors, sheer project lawful weirdness, that might save her.
She's still not even being unusually slow about breaking, though she's now being paid less attention.
It really does hurt, though. Future civilization won't be happy about this. They'll make the devil hurt 10 times as much as she gets hurt, even if it's 30 years later that they come for her. Yes, that's a threat, since devils are into those.
They're really not. Devils are lawful beings, see? Humans who just invented the concept of not giving in to threats don't tend to take more than a few days at most to realize they do actually give in to threats. It takes a lot of centuries to hammer that out of them. You shouldn't feel too bad, the voice inside Peranza's head assures her soothingly. More than 90% of new slaves are still thinking angry, defiant things about revenge at this stage. You're not unusually slow at all.
Then this wretched mockery of an agent will get to think its own angry, defiant thoughts for a time, when civilization comes for it. And Peranza, when she is healed, will bear it eager witness.
The desire to torment your tormentors is a very healthy, very hellish desire. Some devils are built half on that. Not that this one gets to be a devil, of course, but... Shortly after that, and with some irritation, the Countess Kerenoskelis departs to receive a messenger. She hasn't released the sale listing yet, so it can't be about that. Shortly after that, and with considerably more irritation, the Countess Kerenoskelis returns and dismisses the fire and hands her unexpectedly worthless prize over to the devil assigned to convey her on to her next destination.
It takes her a time to recover to start again after the fire stops.
Akakarasot, the devil's work. Iarwain. Time does not usually run strangely in hell. It is a lawful place, not a chaotic one. Space here, on the other hand, is ofttimes tormented and punished until it brokenly submits to the will of its superiors. They are traveling down a long, winding path, down and down the side of a stony mountain glowing in patches with its own heat, suggestive of leading to a lower plane of hell, rather than from one part of Dis to another. Cage after cage after cage is set into the side of that mountain, along that pathway. Most of the cages do not glow dully red, but even those cages that don't, there is a wavering about them recognizable as heat. Bad slaves in Dis are sent here, to scream and sob for weeks or months, while angrier things chained in those cages for centuries or millennia do express their wrath and sate their urges. If you were entirely fresh meat to hell, who'd never seen any part of hell but Dis, you might think that you were witnessing cruelty indulged rather than moderate correction of a petitioner. You might think that the screaming, begging, coherent word-using wretches in the cages were what souls look like in hell when they are broken. Akakarasot holds the meat aloft by her hair, in one hand, to let her see.
Where are you taking me?
He doesn't answer.
That observation might have had a different effect on a Peranza who hadn't spent the last weeks immersed in a conspiracy, desperately trying to keep a true Death Ilani deluded, being warned over and over by Asmodia of how Keltham might apply the law of filtered evidence. Would there be a prior possibility, of significant probability, that next Peranza would be taken deeper into hell as she was promised? Of course, a pretty large one. But she was previously being hurt and being told that pain is inescapable, that this was an important lesson to her. When she was first cast into the Countess's dwelling as an important Project Lawful girl, she was dragged through walls of flame. When she couldn't stop herself from thinking of the Queen's instruction, her torment was increased. Since the Countess returned from her brief absence, she hasn't been hurt at all. This does not seem like the way of hell. This does not feel like hell's style and signature. Would there be a prior possibility that they'd try to raise Peranza's hopes only to cast her down? Think about what this possibility would predict, before you'd seen any particular observations that purportedly result. They could tell her some lie about her rescue if they wanted to produce that result, Peranza would have believed it, and probably without question in her state of desperation and hope. Or if they didn't want to lie, they could escort her through relatively peaceful and well-appointed pathways of hell, guarded by resistance, visibly protected. Telling her nothing, taking her someplace that looks terrifying while not hurting her, sounds a lot more like they're not allowed to lie and aren't allowed to hurt her and are hoping she makes mistakes on her own. Could they cleverly anticipate what Peranza would think of possible plots and show her what she would infer was hell trying to conceal good news from Peranza? Peranza might have been more deceived by that thought if she hadn't been a minor player herself for so long in Cheliax's desperately struggling conspiracy. Peranza has seen what happened with Asmodia and her headband. Peranza has heard about Keltham's time travel hypothesis to explain the strangeness there. Peranza has been told even about Keltham's detected thoughts about how conspiracy Cheliax wouldn't plot all that weirdness to talk him out of using a headband since they could have just not told him about Fox's cunning in the first place. And she grasps on an intuitive level now that when the conspiracy is treating you one way consistently and then suddenly switches to a totally different policy, the most likely reason is not that they have done something incredibly clever to fool you by anticipating your guesses. It's that things didn't go according to their plan. The devils in hell might actually be clever, but her sudden, inexplicable death, just as Abarca was about to really get started on her, in Galarian where mortals break more easily, that part of this probable project lawful fuckery, from tropes, from Iomeda, from Caden Kalian, Peranza doesn't even know. She wasn't really hoping I didn't really hope until now. That part happened in Cheliax. There were no incredibly clever devils there. She died immediately after making her resolution not to break, in fact. A resolution she'd need to hold to, briefly, for her brief time in hell. A careful timing, and a caring one. And Peranza starts laughing. In the midst of hell, in the midst of screams, being carried down a steep, winding path through a mountain glowing with heat and pain, being held up by her hair by a terrifying hooded devil, gripping enough of her hair that it doesn't even hurt, to be held so. And it's obvious when she looks down that the real reason he's carrying her is that the path below them is strewn with barbed needles, and to protect her from that would give away more than they wish. In the midst of hell, Peranza is laughing.
Believe it if you wish.
Oh, she is, because on all of the actually reasonable hypotheses for how she'd come to be carried here, that don't sound like a conspiracy trying desperately to cover its mistakes, he would have hurt her badly the moment she started laughing. She didn't believe it, Peranza now realizes. She didn't really believe one single thing she thought. That needed to be true, or that she needed to believe in order for her to talk her way out. She was just in the midst of one more giant self-deception, woven entirely out of things that she desperately needed or wanted to believe, that she had to believe in order to persuade the people around her. The pathway of an Ilani really isn't easy, is it? She's not even close to being one. One of their 7-year-olds instead of one of their 6-year-olds, at best. Hope and joy and relief are kindled in her now, blazing in her like a newborn star, and their light illuminates everything so differently from suppressed fear sublimated into desperation. She's not even sure she can count how many incredibly blatantly stupid things she thought under that pressure. Civilization punish devils? They never would. It's not what civilization is. There will not be a war on hell when the time comes. There will be a rescue operation on hell. Some of the things in cages can sense the alignments of souls, and those lunge forward against their bars, howling with hunger as Peranza of civilization passes them, for the smell of something as lawful good as that is like honey and wine and an angel's roasted liver. She doesn't particularly want to live with this hope, if it's false, for that which can be destroyed by the truth should be, and so she starts doing something that should definitely get her shut down if she's not protected. Besides, to help others is also civilization's way. "Hold on," shouts Peranza, through the winding pathway where the bad souls of Dis are punished. She screams it loudly enough to hurt her throat. It's not like she can damage her throat that way. Hold on to as much of yourselves as you can for as long as you can. Things in Galarian are changing, and civilization is coming. In 20 years or 2 centuries, this will end. Look how I say this and am not punished. Hold to hope. for help is on the way.
Not a single petitioner in reach of her voice believes her. Even less the saner things in cages and a devil or two that they pass along the way. Those look at her with contempt. What would be pity if they had any trace of pity in them? They all have the same thought, seeing a lawful good soul like that in hell, crying out what she cries. They are witnessing the procession of a maledicted paladin. Those are sometimes permitted to cry out their last defiant battle cries to Eumede on their way to be broken, if the dead paladin is too stupid or deluded to realize why it only hurts the listening souls more, how it emphasizes to the victims the patheticness of defiance and the falseness of hope. Some of the more perceptive things see that her soul is owned, not maledicted, but there is no curiosity in them about how that came to be. Even the devil holding Peranza aloft, who sees her thoughts and knows she believes her own words, gives not even a moment's thought to the possibility that anything she is saying might be truth. It's not that he assigns probability 0. It's that he hasn't been told to think about it. And absent any such thought, it's an obvious stupidity to deny Asmodeus's victory. Only one shattered thing alone, in hell, witnesses Peranza's procession and wonders.
Nethys sees all. Not all of him sees everything at once, but he is God of knowledge. Some part of him must see something, if it is there to be seen. This part of Nethys has been watching this part of hell for all the millennia since Nethys ascended and shattered. Mad? Of course it is mad, even madder than the rest of Nethys. Nethys was not a particularly kindly person in his mortal life, nor an especially cooperative or coordinating mortal. The rest of him has for the most part abandoned those parts of himself that were condemned to gaze upon endless torments. But the God of knowledge sees Peranza in hell, as the God of knowledge sees all things. And the part of him that bears this witness sees in full Peranza's memory of the bizarre events that surrounded her, of a visitor from outside reality, the hints of mysterious tropes, that Nethys himself has intervened about these events in a way that must have taken half his pieces working together. He is enabled, then, to see in a direction that is only very rarely connected by strong enough informational links to this part of Dis, a direction of which other parts of Nethys rarely bother to tell this fragment, as they rarely tell it anything. He sees the vast beings, each individually greater than all the great beyond, looking in this direction from outside time, watching him, watching the procession of Peranza through hell. Thousands of them, at the least, and perhaps more, for it is hard to enumerate the numbers of what lives outside of time and could turn their gaze to this Galarian moment from who knows what stretches of meta-time. They would not be watching. Nethys instinctively guesses what even he cannot know with near certainty. They would not be watching in such numbers if they knew how this all would end. But that they are even uncertain. A shattered, lost, ignored fragment of Nethys knows hope, then, that hell may be ending after all. 100 years, the devil Akakarasot thinks, has been given to this Peranza in the gardens of Erekura. That is how much time there is for rescue to come to her to hell. For 100 years, then, this fragment of Nethys will withhold his power from the occasional attempts some equally tormented fellow piece of himself makes to destroy Pharasma's creation. And if, in 100 years, that hope fails him, he will strike out against everything that there is in renewed fury and terrible disappointment. 100 years, it's almost no time at all to hell.
It is known to civilization, and told now also to Peranza, that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, conserving momentum. When you leap into the air, you push the planet away from you, some tiny bit, with your feet. When the gravitational force of the planet pulls you back to ground, the gravitational force of yourself on all the rest of the planet pulls it towards you. Some tiny amount, just enough to balance all of your own momentum change, a tiny, tiny acceleration of something much, much bigger than you. More so even than the procession of a maledicted paladin, this soul does not belong in hell, whatever its sail. It burns not only with defiance and faith and lawful goodness, but also hope and relief and joy. Ever so slightly, the fabric of hell trembles at Peranza's passing. Even as the dark weight of hell tries to press in on her soul presses back. If all the petitioners in hell could feel so, all in the same moment, perhaps the fabric of the plane itself would be changed. It's a futile hope and not a good plan. Very, very few petitioners, even among recently lost paladins, are capable of feeling anything like what Peranza is feeling now. Those who've been here a few centuries have been shaped so that they would not want to feel anything so pathetic. And even if neither of those things were true, the petitioners of hell would not be able to coordinate around one single moment of hope like that. And Peranza goes on crying out hope, hope, hope through the paths of hell.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059